Carbon is a major issue and set to become a worse one since the EPA apparently can't regulate it anymore. And there's a lot of things that contribute to the excess of carbon flooding our atmosphere: agriculture, transportation, things like that, cargo ships. Private jets, though, something that we should focus on. Now, at large, private planes only contribute about 2% of all the carbon that goes out into the planet in a given year. Now, the way I said that, you might think, oh, it's only 2%, but no, hold on. Don't just let me say that and accept it. They're just private planes. Why do they get to make 2% of all the carbon? Have you been on a private plane this week? Do you know anyone who's been on a private plane in the last year? I don't know that I do, and yet they contribute 2% of all of the carbon. Now, the little visualization that you saw next week, can we put that back up? Because there was this great little video that was put together, and you can see it at Earthbound. It is a comparison of the carbon emissions of a private plane, that massive mountain of carbon, versus what a person flying economy contributes in terms of carbon. Now, obviously the private jet, which could be for as small as one person who's taking that trip, is way more carbon. But let's also be clear that the economy class, that's contributing a lot too. Flight in general is a massive outsized contributor to the carbon flooding the atmosphere and thus contributing to climate change as well. But I gotta give you a couple of these numbers because they are so fascinating, and great work by Real World Visuals and Earthbound for putting this together. A jumbo jet flight from London to New York adds about 200 metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Now, if there's 349 passengers, the maximum capacity of some of these planes, that works out to 572 kilograms each. But business class passengers take up more space than economy class, first class more even than that. So a transatlantic passenger in economy class adds greenhouse gas to the atmosphere equivalent to 4 weeks of emissions from a typical European household. Each first class passenger contributes more than 38 weeks. But that still is for a passenger plane. So one flight for one person is equal to more than half a year of an entire European household. When you go to a private jet, that uses as much fuel as 9 first class passengers, 26 business class passengers, or 80 economy class passengers, which means that crossing the Atlantic in a private jet adds about 25 metric tons of carbon dioxide. That's 6 years of emissions from an average European household. And so, look, all of this is really bad and there's not nearly enough focus on it. But one person taking one private plane trip can contribute going on towards a decade of a regular person's contributions. And that's a European family. Europe contributes quite a bit to carbon emissions. When you look at people in the developing world, you're talking about literally decades of their emissions just for you to go to Zurich one way. And I know that this gets a bit in the weeds, but these numbers are just so amazing. I don't feel like they're talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's a problem and it does feel like it's in the weeds, but there's an indirect way to address it, which is income redistribution, wealth redistribution. So you don't have, I mean, think about how much it costs to both buy a private jet, but especially right now to fuel the private jet. These are people who have they literally have money to burn, okay, through the fuel that they're purchasing for these private jets. And so I say that to make the point that if we had an equity-based economic system that ensured that everyone's paying their fair share into the system, I would argue that it would dramatically lower the number of individuals who have the money to burn on a private jet. And it would also obviously address other issues, because just to be honest and thinking about this from political priorities, legislative priorities, and how people are likely to respond to this, even though it is a problem, when you mentioned the 2%, I think a lot of people are immediately just gonna disregard this issue. And so when you tackle it in a more indirect way, I think, and an indirect way that solves a lot of other issues, by the way.
Sure.
Including the gutting of all of our social safety net programs.
Yeah, and you're fair. And look, I don't think that we should put as much attention into it as we do into transportation or agriculture and those sorts of things. The issue is that those are, at least in their defense, issues that affect everyone. Everyone needs to drive or get about in some way. Everyone needs to eat, whether they eat meat or not. And this is something where they are getting away with such an outsized contribution just for a very small handful of the richest people in the world.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.